Something that I say along the way will touch you. I know it. Let's begin that process of crafting a meaningful life.
Here's Mary Crafts.
Welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. I'm Mary Crafts. And as I talk to people and if they're a good fit for my podcast, the thing I keep in mind is the title of my podcast, Crafting a Meaningful Life. And if they are guests that I think are going to help move the needle for both of us, for you and for me, then I'm all for it. So when my guest today is Cindy Benezra, and when her PR person reached out to me and I briefly looked at her bio, I thought, she's an event planner? Oh, no. That's my old life. I said, I don't talk about anything about hospitality industry on my podcast. Thank you very much. I retired 5 years ago and I've never looked back. And then I thought, well, I might as well look at her website. So I went to her website, and yes, she is an active, independent, has her own company, event planner. So immediately I knew, well, first, I know she can do anything. People think that being, the president of the United States or the traffic manager at the airport is the most stressful job. No, it's if you work in the hospitality industry. And every single person in the world is depending upon you to come through at an exact moment with a perfect event. So that I knew immediately that Cindy was somebody that I could relate to. But then I went to her website. And those of you who are listening can't see this, but I'm holding up my phone with her picture of her website on it. And I thought, oh, that's a beautiful website. And if you're on YouTube, then you're in good shape. But she's got this beautiful picture that's very engaging. And then I kind of read down here and I read down here and I read down here. And then there was a quote from someone on her website, from a beautiful Angela. And it said, Cindy is living proof that you are not your abuse, trauma, or story. It's what happened to you, but it doesn't define you. And immediately I said, she's my gal. So Cindy, welcome to Crafting a Meaningful Life.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I love that. That was a great segue into this.
So
true.
Well, that's my first question and story to you is I know how I segued into leaving the hospitality industry, which you haven't really left, but leaving that and trying to reform my whole persona of how the public sees me and end up over here as a thought leader. And so I guess I have several questions for you, but let's start with that one. What prompted the change? And why has this now become the driving force in your life? And what's the trauma that she speaks of?
Well, I have to say, just being human, we all have our traumas, we all have our trials and tribulations that we go through, but we don't typically talk about them. I like to joke and say they're not cocktail worthy. They're just something that we just don't talk about. They're heavy. They're part of our story, but often there might be feelings of maybe shame, or this is not the appropriate time. We only allow people in at a certain time close enough to share, and some people don't. And so I felt this was always a part of me, my background. And as I was reaching my 50s, I started just to share a little bit more about my life. So when I was younger, I was sexually abused by my father, and he abused other people in the neighborhood. So he's a true pedophile. And he was physically abusive. He was just a true narcissist. And I went through a lot of trials. My son was born with a neurofibroma, which is a tumor in his head, and which led him to have Well, he was blind for in one eye for a while. He couldn't talk, he couldn't walk, and he would have 63 seizures a day. And with my horrific, I know, with my horrific medical bills, I ended up becoming homeless, and um, I went through another trial in life. So all these stories compiled, and I've just kind of glossed over them. They were all huge parts of my personality, and that formed and morphed me. And being in the event business with my daughter, her and I opened up a company. I thought, well, how fabulous is this? Now I get to write maybe an entertaining book because I love to entertain. I mean, these are all stories of my life, but I get to finally write this fabulous recipe. I've always wanted to do this, tips on entertaining and make it a cookbook, like how to entertain and have a party at your home. Fabulous and glorious. And as I was doing this, the exercise of that, I found that as I was going through these recipes since I was 5, that every recipe had a little story, maybe like our shoes, maybe those steps that we take in life. And when I was going through these recipes, I would get triggered by a thought or a memory. And so I had notebooks in front of me. And in the notebooks, I would go, oh, that was a griefful time, but I have that recipe. And I'd write my story about grief just to get the thought out of my head onto paper so that I could carry on and go forward to accomplish what I was trying to do, was write recipes and entertaining. And when I reached one, it was Mrs. Anderson's grilled cheese sandwich, and I was 5 years old. And I thought, oh, I remember what happened at 5 years old. And then I picked another notebook, and then that was the history of my sexual abuse. And as I was going through them, I had one on the grief of my son, things that lifted me up and helped carry me through these dark times. So it was a lot of inspirational quotes, things that I did, exercises to find inspiration and go forward. And some were healing tools. So I wrote those things all down. And when I looked in the front, I thought, yes, I did accomplish the recipe book and some fabulous entertainment things. But I ran my hand over the 5 books or notepads, and my scratched out, some of them were still full of anger. And I thought, which one is the one that I'd like to do? And I put my hand down right away on the cookbook and the recipe book, and then, or an entertainment ideas. And then I thought, which one holds the most shame? And I went to the one that had put my hand on that. And that was the one about my sexual abuse history. And I thought, why is there so much shame? Because we have 1 in 4 girls in this country and 1 in 6 boys. And I thought, gosh, here I am, an old lady. Why do I still carry this shame? And it is not my shame to carry. Why do I still hold it? And I thought about it. I mean, I really put some good thought into it. And I thought it's just because there's still a stigma around sexual abuse. It's how we perceive people. However, it happens all the time, and it's just something that we don't talk about. And then I thought, ooh, I'm not going to go there. I thought, oh, inspirational quotes, something happy. We just want to be happy, and that's our goal. And then I thought, no, sometimes to get to those happy times, we have to talk about those dark times. And I couldn't have gone through all of this just to tuck it away. So I thought, I'm going to write about my grief and my shame around sexual abuse. And so that's how I started this journey. And there's still 2 sides. I mean, there's so many beautiful aspects to all of us where we've had trauma. And I thought, well, I'm going to start with this and maybe be a squeaky wheel in this world to maybe possibly take some of that stigma. And when we could remove some of the stigma and make it a common conversation without those feelings, like we discuss opiates, we discuss alcoholism. way back in my time, it was the divorcee, that was just so
Yeah,
taboo.
yeah,
My mother would go, have you heard about the divorcee down on the block? That was like a big thing. Divorce is
yeah.
nothing. Like that's, some people marry 5 times and we taught, it's like, oh, that's horrific. But we have moved past the stigma of divorce, and we have moved past the
Yeah.
stigma of drug and alcohol. And so that's kind of like my mission right now, is to talk. I don't have a solution, but it's just to talk and open up and just discover why it is we hold back in this conversation. So I'm talking candidly to people, and hoping someone listens.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just thank you and applaud your vulnerability, your willingness to expose that which was meant to be hidden. Your
Mm,
father meant you to hide it, society meant you to hide it. And so for a long time, you wore that cloak of this is to be hidden. And then
right.
I don't know if it was an awakening or if it was gradually you shed that cloak. What was the process like to make that decision to decide this is what you were going to do, to take the cloak off?
Have you ever, oh, you probably could relate to this. It's that horrific fear where you're like, I could never do this. I could never speak in front of people. I could never, we've all got our nevers. I could never share that. I could never dance
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this. I think, I just remember feeling that fear so intense. And I have a belief that what anything seems scary or terrifying, that's probably the thing I should be doing. So you probably could relate to
Oh,
that. You're like, okay, that's
absolutely.
terrifying.
I'm like with you 100%.
So I thought, oh no, this is something that I need to delve into, at least for my soul and maybe to heal. But I really thought about, this is something that I thought about as a young girl. I remember watching Oprah's show. Do you remember watching Oprah when she came out and she talked about um,
Mm-hmm.
that she was a
Mm-hmm.
sexual abuse
Yep.
victim? I remember I was frozen in the room and I was standing next to the ironing board and I was ironing my clothes and folding my clothes up. And I thought, oh, I cried with her, along with her, and I thought I could never do that. And there was some little voice inside of me and said, just because I was such a quiet kid and secrets ran deep in our family. There was something
Yeah.
that said, oh, yes, you can. And I thought, oh, just dismiss that. There's no way I could ever share this secret. um, that was so ingrained in us not to share anything in our household. My mother had very strict rules about what happens in this household stays in this household. If your mom and your dad have a fight, you're not going to share that outside. If we do anything, we're discussing this all within our home. And we don't talk about those things. I think things are a lot different now. Like, at least I have 4 kids and I look at them, they talk about everything and everything's shared.
Yeah. It's much, I think
Hmm.
it's harder to hide now, and yet it's easier to hide. Certainly people can hide behind the screen of social media and just be watchers and really self ridicule on social media. And yet there's the other side where they see other people sharing and being vulnerable. Well, then I can too. So we see it helping both sides. And I think that there is that thing of that you really have to know it's it's time to share what has been hidden.
I think so too. Yeah, we all have masks that we choose to go out in public, and that we feel that that's the perception that we want to hold on to. But if you want to make a change, if you feel that you have something greater to share than what is your chosen mask, it's it's okay to take off that mask and show that side to you. I mean, we are right now in a society where it's acceptable.
Mhm.
Might be a little shocking and scary, but it's acceptable to do so.
One of the things I keep going back to that quote I read at the beginning, where she said, maybe it was not in that quote, maybe it was another place on your website. I read this, but that you are not. Oh, it was in that quote. You are not your trauma. You are not the story that you've written. So,
Mhm.
talk to me about that piece, because I think so many people who have been through that kind of trauma, or really any sort of growing up childhood thing, believes that that is their story, and it's almost like, and I'm sticking to it. They don't want to let go because it's what they know. They know their story. They don't know what they would be or who they would be if they didn't have that story. So I know that sounds crazy, but that there's safety in staying with your story and living in it. But what does it feel like, and how scary is it to let go of, I'm maybe I'm really not my trauma. Maybe I'm not the victim of childhood sexual abuse. What happens now?
Well, I think in a sense, I am I think in a sense we are not that story if we choose not to allow it to own us in our body, like in a cellular way.
Uh-huh.
If we could let that fear and release that fear in a sense. And when you talk about it, people kind of go, oh, she's talking about it, but they can see, okay, the event planner. I have a normal life. I have a normal relationship with my husband. Um, I always ask people, I used to ask my children, what does it look like to, what do you perceive me as? What would you perceive somebody who has been sexually abused? And I remember
Mm,
my son saying, oh, somebody who lives under a bridge. And I have to say, it cracked me up because that's his perception of
yeah.
what broken or and I said, well, later on, I just found it amusing because I think we all have perceptions of written stories about what somebody looks like, but we don't see that person as a successful or a healthy person, somebody who could have healthy relationships, somebody who's made it through the other side. We think that they're always encapsulated in that spot, but it is a choice to, if you want to be encapsulated in that spot. When as a teenager, I felt that I couldn't release my fear and release like go to the other side of, I'm going to use the word forgiveness because I think it's a very iffy word, but to forgive myself for what had happened and not hold on. But if I did, I was betraying other survivors. And when I realized that actually I was helping survivors if I came if I express myself, just express my process, how I went through that. But I was still a whole person. And I think holding on to that of your story often imprisons you. And through the process of talking or healing, you have more freedom. And then it doesn't own ownership of you, but it still is your story, but it doesn't imprison you in a way that one would have if they just encapsulated
Yeah.
themselves in that trauma.
There were so many great things in what you just said, and I think that forgiveness of self piece is probably one of the final steps. It's one thing to forgive your father, it's one thing to forgive your mother, it's one thing to forgive this. But when you can forgive yourself, then you have reached that place that you can really find healing in the whole. So,
Right.
as you made that decision and that you were going to be naked in front of the world, and
That's what it felt
yeah,
like. That's what it felt
like a
like.
dream with you kept
Yeah,
going outside and you realized you didn't have any clothes on, you know, and you were
exactly.
going into the grocery store and all of a sudden you realized that probably half the grocery store knows now that you've had childhood sexual abuse. I mean, that really is like showing up without your clothes on. And so you're naked.
You nailed it. That's how I felt probably for a good year, that people were looking at me going, oh, there's that poor abused girl who's talking about it. Why? And there's so many jokes about it in movies, like, oh, they were sexually abused, like,
I I
so
do know
like there's
what
a
you mean.
stigma
Yeah.
around it.
And that's how
Yeah,
people they'd laugh. Like if somebody does something crazy, they'll say, "Oh, don't worry about her. She was sexually abused as a child." Like that's a joke. I'm like, "Stop
right.
it. This is not a funny thing." So, as you made this decision and took hold of the reins to craft your meaningful life, what were the actions and what was the shift in the mental thought process that allowed you to move forward? And where are you today?
So I'm going to try to do this in a Reader's Digest version, but
Yeah.
I didn't know that this had happened to me because it was so traumatic. I just forgot what had happened to me, and it's called
Yeah. Yeah.
dissociation. So I dissociated completely. And at the time, my family was traveling different places. And every time I would travel and go someplace else, go to a different school, um, it was one step further away from myself. And when I was becoming sexually interested and, kissing boys and the whole thing, I was like 16 going towards 17. I was, I started to have these horrific nightmares. And in these horrific nightmares, I would journal them down because I just wanted the thoughts out of my head because they kept on repeating.
Mm,
And so through this process, um, I was able to put the pieces back, of what, like kind of almost recreating a
yeah.
trauma. And if I had to describe it more visually, it felt like a mirror, and the mirror had been shattered and fell down, and that I would pick up the pieces and put the shards of glass back and see my reflection in it. And that was all in my journals. And when
Mm,
I had a complete piece of this broken glass in my journals where I could see repeated stories over and over and over again, I realized that this was my life, that this was not a dream. This was not something I made up. I felt it because I could see in my dreams this, like I was completely sopping sweat, and I would scream in the middle of the night. And um, I went to my mother and I said, did dad ever touch my mom? And she's like, oh, why would you ask these questions? She goes, everything's going so well in my marriage, why are you asking this? And I just thought, oh, that's not my mother. Like, that's an odd thing to say. And then I went to my dad and I said, Dad, did you touch me? And he said, um, you know, did you read this in a book? Did you read this? Did you see this in a movie? He played all different realms of defenses. And then he did the whole thing where, are you okay? Are you mentally okay? Why would you, say such a thing? So it was a lot of gaslighting. It was just, at that moment when I looked into his big blue eyes, I thought, oh, he's lying. He is lying. And this did happen. And in this state, I fell into the deepest depression.
yeah.
I never knew what depression was. I mean, I just heard the word, but I fell into the deepest depression where I contemplated suicide. And that suicidal ideation. It's where you
Yeah.
contemplate suicide, but you don't really act on it. And I would actually get home from school, sit on my window sill, and we lived in an apartment complex. It was about 4 or 5 flights down, and I would sit on the windowsill because I felt, in a sense, that that's exactly where I felt in life. Was I'm sitting on the windowsill every moment, Should I jump or should I stay?
Wow.
And in that process, I kind of contemplated, like, what I just wanted the pain to stop. I needed the pain to stop.
Yeah.
And I felt trapped and trapped in my reality of the truth. And I just wanted to end. And that's the only thing I knew how to make it end. I wasn't logically thinking, I was depressed. And I would sit there after school and dangle my feet and sometimes go thicker and then like scoot off the edge a little bit more. And there's a little part of me, even just describing this, even though I've had a lifetime of therapy, there was a time at the very beginning where this was really hard for me to talk about. And I felt, because I value life so much.
Mhm.
So just to think that I was so lost and so stuck. And in this process of going through the pros and cons of life and why I should be here, that became my healing journey
Ah,
and kind of my story from the age of 16. And now I'm 60 and I am still grateful that I didn't jump. And so it became
yes.
my healing journey of how to heal myself. And I lived in a foreign country. I didn't have resources to go to a library. I didn't speak Spanish. It was an hour away. So I had to make up and find those things within myself. And a lot of the things that I write about my book, or in my book, I give tools at the end. Those are the things that I came up with as a 16-year-old to save myself from not jumping off the ledge. And they're not fancy things.
Yeah.
Um, they're not fancy. But they're tools that I think we all innately have within ourselves. And I think we have these tools within us. It's just I didn't have one and I had to dig deep, deep and hard to find my way back. So this has
Mm.
been a healing journey from that onset, that stage until now. And I feel like it's always been, I guess you could say, a calling, but I wasn't brave enough to speak up or share up until now.
Well, thank you for being brave enough, first off. And then your story is amazing, but not singular.
Nope,
There are so
not.
many people who are in this situation. And I work with an organization called Sapria, and they are all about ending childhood sexual abuse and then also about healing the survivors. And the one thing I know for sure that there are several things I think as a community and as a world, we that need lead to this whole healing of our planet. And that is that two things. One, to believe survivors.
Hmm.
And think of the difference in your life if your mom had believed you, or if your dad had been vulnerable and naked with you and said, I'm sorry. The difference in your life and in the lives of millions if we simply came to the truth, to stop the hiding and start the healing.
Hmm.
And to this point, have either your mom or dad come to that acknowledgement point?
Yeah. Um, that was a crazy journey. I think when I was about like 19 through 21, I was pretty angry at my mother. I remember at
Yeah.
19, I was, you know, I think I looked, it was a little bit more reflection. I was getting older. I was thinking about maybe, dating seriously, what it would look like if I had my own family, what kind of mother would I be? And I think I was reflecting of that back and forth. And I'm just going to say I was raging pissed. And I went to my mom and I said, I came to you, I shared
Yeah.
these things with you, and she did leave. It takes a while to leave. She had her own fears, but I had to have these discussions with her about why she was so afraid to leave him. And a lot of it was financial
Yep.
security. She had fear
Yep.
herself. he was a frightening man. And I think through that process, I understood her more and understood her about her realities and her fears, even though they may have not been mine. I was able to kind of let go through a lot of that anger. And um, she really was able to apologize, and I was able to understand her. She was able to understand me more.
Wow.
But when I was telling her I would have lived on the streets, and she was like, I could have never done that, but maybe I could have done that. And I think it was an acceptance of, like, we are two different people. Our actions are different. We think different. Our fears are different. We're a generation of growing up completely different and understanding. And so through that, actually, I was able to let go and just kind of, that was a sense of freedom. And then
Yes.
at the very end, my father, who I do not get along with, and I never made any bones about it. I was always just sort of like my dad. I think that's where, if you have a prep, somebody in the family who is, because it's usually like 92% somebody
Somebody
that
that you
you
know.
know, somebody that you know. And they would always ask, how come you're not close to your father? And I would just say, oh, we're oil and vinegar, we're fire and butane. I mean, I would think of some, and just kind of let it go as that. But as my dad got older, he made me the executor of his will. Lord only knows why. I don't know
Wow.
why. And I thought, ugh, like, really? Like, I don't even really talk to
Yeah.
you. Like, ugh,
Oh.
why? So he kept on getting sick. And so, I mean, I'm going to do the right thing. And at the very end, I ended up taking care of my father. Um, so it was, I think, in a sense, it was, I'm going to do the right thing. If someone gives me a challenge, I am going to step up to the plate. I find it harder to ignore and not do that. So I stepped up to the plate. And I have this analogy that if a dog bit me, dog got hit on the side of the road, and I picked up that dog and that dog bit me, I would still take the dog to go and get help. That just works for me. To pretend that it doesn't exist, it's more energy for
Yeah.
me. So it's just managing his medical. I mean, I thought, how hard can this be? So I moved him from California to Washington, put him 5 minutes away from me. And in that journey, in that process, where I would fill his pill containers and we would just have light conversation, I was able to have some pretty deep conversations with him. And then I asked him again, Dad, why are you the way you are? And then when I realized that he was a true pedophile, that he was mentally ill, that he was raped by soldiers in the war, it didn't make any of it better. It didn't make any of it right. But what it gave me was his truth. Even though I felt as sick as and nauseous from his truth, it was a little bit of, okay, I see you for who you are, because I've shared who I am. And it felt more like an equal playing, like a like a play, like a line where I could see equally, like where it was matched with our energy, I guess you could say, and our mindset. And I just thought, he's a really sick man. And um
Yeah.
and he's just a sick man. And I thought, do I forgive him? And I remember saying, I don't forgive you for what you did, but I am forgiving myself, and I'm going to find, I remember thinking, and I found freedom in that. So some people say, oh, you forgave him. I mean, whatever your definition is of forgiveness, there was a
Yeah.
process of forgiving in that, and different levels of that. So and I felt it when I was done, that I had no electric charge around my story, that I was able to, it was just completely freeing by talking about it. And I thought, if people could understand where there is no electric charge in your body when you
Yeah.
look at that person, or when you see that person, or when you go back and feel that to me, that's what I defined freedom. That's what I defined forgiveness. And if you could find that, I thought I have to share my story. Because people can find this. You can find healing through this, even though you think you can't. I know you can. I just know you can. It's a journey. It's hard work. Um, it's the longer road, but you can.
Mhm. I love the analogy that you gave at the end about there was no more energy. And that idea of having a very small cattle prod, and that every time you interacted with that person, it was like somebody went, nee, nee, and that you experienced those energy jolts, like being shocked, physically shocked from a light switch or something. And to deal
Right.
with that all your life, every time you saw him, every time you saw your mother, and the amount of time that would be triggered, and to move to a point of healing where you no longer experience that is absolutely phenomenal. And I love the idea that you've written a book about the steps to your healing. Someone said to me the other day, you're going to find this interesting, Cindy, I think, who ran a huge mental health clinic. And they said, why would we listen to your podcast to be healed from such emotional and traumatic things? You're not a social worker. And I said, well, actually, I am. Pre-hospitality, my degree is in social work. But regardless of that, she said, a lot of your guests, they're not educated on how to heal trauma. And I said, they lived it. They found the path. They worked through their own soul to find healing. And if that doesn't make you the greatest teacher, I don't know what does. I can tell you it's
That's
way
right.
better than what a university is teaching you out of a book.
Well, sometimes it's the PhD when you become you've gotten your PhD after you've had numerous amounts of trial and error through these horrific things, and you become the specialist
Yeah.
of yourself. And through the storytelling of how you went through that, I think those are the little nuggets that people find hope and
Yeah.
inspiration that possibly they can too. And I always say I have looked for people who are sunshine like yourself, who have a glow about them, and people who look for hope and hope in others. And those are the things that carry us through. If it's the placebo, I'm taking that placebo.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, Cindy, our time is gone. I could talk to you there. I have so many other questions. May I at another time extend an invitation for you to come back, and actually let's hold up your book and let's talk through this. But in the meantime, at the end of this podcast, to my listeners, those of you who would like to know more about Cindy, will include her website so that you can actually see her or contact information. And of course, a link. Is your book on Amazon?
It's on
Yeah.
Amazon.
So
Yeah.
we'll include that link to Amazon where you can purchase that book. And I do believe in storytelling. I think that it allows us to connect to people. And the one thing that's more important to me, Cindy, than anything else on this planet, there is one thing, and that is the oneness, that we stop seeing ourselves as separate beings and we see the you in me and the me in you. And that
Exactly.
then we can heal. And so I invite you into my tribe to heal along with all of us. And thank you for being my guest on here. Is there any last parting moment that you would like to share with the listeners of their healing?
That you're not alone, that you don't walk alone. There's many of us out there and feel and grieve exactly the same way as you do.
That we are one. Thank you for being here
Mm-hmm.
with me today and talking about how we are crafting our meaningful life. Namaste.